In the creation account given in chapter 1 of Genesis, at regular stages, God declares that the products of his creation were good. In particular, in Genesis 1:4, 1:10, 1:12, 1:18, and 1:21. Finally, when his work was complete, he states in Genesis 1:31 that all was very good. Really? Well, in this video I want to take issue with him over that statement. In my view, God's creation was far from very good. It had several critical design flaws that an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent entity would not, in my view, have ever made. You may consider that it is somewhat presumptuous of me to make such a bold statement, but not only do I think I can prove it, I believe that God knew it himself. We don't have to go much further into Genesis before things start going wrong. Genesis 2:17 reads as follows:
But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest of it thou shalt surely die.
Let's leave aside for now the fact that we know that Adam and Eve did eat of the tree of knowledge, and they didn't die that day. My first problem is this: what was the tree doing there in the first place? Why did he put it there? Why did he put fruit on it? At the beginning of chapter 3 of Genesis, we see another chronic mistake made by God. He'd created a walking, talking serpent, one which spoke a language Eve was able to understand, and one which seemed hell-bent on messing things up. A lying, walking, talking serpent with a desire to mess up all the good work that God has done is not something that, in my view, a perfect God would have included in his creation. Neither did it help that he had imbued in Eve the trait of curiosity and susceptibility to temptation. So, as we all know, the lying, walking, talking serpent convinces Eve to eat the fruit, and she gives it to Adam, and he eats it as well. Then something rather odd happens at Genesis 3:8 to 3:10. At this stage, Adam and Eve appreciate that they are naked and have made clothes from fig leaves. And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. And the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself. I find this absolutely extraordinary. An omnipresent God can't find Adam, even though he knows he's somewhere in the Garden of Eden. So next time you're threatened that God is watching everything you do, just bear in mind that he seemed unable to find one person in a garden. So how he's meant to keep tracks on over 6 billion people is quite beyond me. We must also consider that it appears that God thinks that the perfect state for a human to be in is nudity. Does this mean that heaven, being perfect, will have all its occupants naked? It's something to bear in mind next time you contemplate a life of eternity with God. Things don't improve a great deal in Genesis 4, in which Cain kills his brother. By the time we get to Genesis 6, things have become so bad, although it's not entirely clear why, that God repenteth that he made man at all. So he decides to commit global genocide, save for Noah, who for some reason has found favour in his eyes. Now you may have thought that he might have had the decency to make the ark for Noah, but he was clearly too peeved to be bothered. I mean, come on, he built an entire universe, but he couldn't be bothered to build a little ark? He could certainly make it rain for 40 days and 40 nights, but left it to Noah to build the ark and collect all the animals. Anyway, let's move on. After a year or so, when everything had been killed off, Noah was free to leave the ark, and as stated in Genesis 9:13, God appears to have regretted his actions in committing genocide, and as a covenant with Noah never to do it again, gave us a rainbow in recompense. A small token, you might think, for someone who'd committed global genocide. and whether Noah was in fact the best choice God could have made to save is questionable, as one of the first things that Noah did was to plant a vineyard and get drunk. See Genesis 9:21. On to Genesis 19. Again, God's master plan has gone terribly wrong. This time in Sodom and Gomorrah, which God blasts away with fire and brimstone. He has the decency to save Lot, although even God can't stop himself turning Lot's wife into a pillar of salt for the crime of looking back at the cities as they were being destroyed. However, he didn't deem it fit to intervene when Lot's daughters got Lot drunk and committed incest with him. In Genesis 22, we get the appalling story of Abraham being prepared to kill his son Isaac at God's request. So, before we are even out of the first book of the Bible, God's very good creation has messed up several times, as has God's attempt at rectifying the situation, a situation which I maintain he was the architect of. He has committed global genocide, he has destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's killed a few others along the way too. Time prohibits me from going into all the deaths committed by God, or at God's command, but you can find it at this website, Dwindling in Unbelief. Over 2.3 million, not including the flood or Sodom and Gomorrah, were killed either by God or at his command. God's next attempt to clear up the mess that he had made appears to be by sending Jesus, his son, down to earth. Was God himself too embarrassed to turn up? In any event, Jesus did little to improve the position, and before I get inundated with comments that God has changed between the Old Testament and the New Testament, I challenge you to find one convincing passage or passages that refer to God changing his mind or his heart, and also you'd have to explain away Matthew 5:17, and explain it away such that it overcomes the comments in this book, in which the primacy of the Gospel of Matthew is persuasively argued. Finally, you would imagine that if God could get one thing right, it would be the creation of angels. But apparently not. He even messed up there when he created Lucifer. It really is a shabby record for an almighty and perfect being. There are other matters that make me think that God's perfect creation was far from perfect. Firstly, if he created the universe, what a shocking waste of space! The universe is billions of light years in diameter. He made all of that just to allow us to live on a small part of the crust of an average planet. Then, of course, we could mention illness, disease, famine, tsunamis, volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, fires, cancer. The list goes on and on. And if God did not foresee the fact that his very good design would go wrong, why did he create hell? And yet, despite all of this, despite all of God's utter incompetence, his vindictiveness, his bloodthirsty nature, his unforgivingness, his anger, his capriciousness, every day, throughout the world, millions will clasp their hands together, kneel and pray to an entity that they consider is perfect, loving, and caring.